Welcome back. I've got Seema Dhanoa online. Seema, how are you?
I'm doing well, Michael. How are you?
I am awesome. Really been looking forward to this conversation. So why don't you share a little bit about you, and then we're going to dive into the conversation, especially talk about your new book.
For sure. So I have a huge background in business transformation. I spent many years at a financial institution on the West Coast, and I just had, wonderful opportunities to do some very transformative work, whether it was implementing technology or creating the first social finance bank in Canada that's out here in Toronto. So just kind of like along that way, like leadership has always been very important to me. I've always contemplated, what makes a good leader, and it's always just been with me. And just one day, it's like a realization came of just how do we get to the future that's better with more value and less harm, and that's what really led to the ideas that are presented in this book about conscious leadership so we can, evolve our way of being and our way of leading, and thus, change the world around us.
It's funny that you mentioned, leadership because with all those experiences that you had from, launching, the bank and all the stuff that you've done and working in the financial district and, at each coast of the country and, an international,
Mhm.
countries such as Canada is. And being able to do all of those things,
Mhm.
you encounter a lot of different leaders, and I can tell already you are one that will observe and see how people lead, and probably borrow from some of the techniques that you learned from to make it part of your own, and eventually you get to this point where it's like, wow, I've got all these tips and techniques. It's like, I want to share this with the world, but how do I go about doing that? And a book is pretty much the best way to do it because that way you can gather those thoughts and ideas and concepts on how to make leadership better. Because we see it, and I know there was Gartner does a ton of studies year after year, and the engagement that we see in organizations
Mhm.
is at record levels of being low. People just are not
Yes.
engaged. No one wants to work in the environments that they're in. A lot of
No.
people will say no one wants to work. It's like that's not true. People do want to work. They want to create. They want to feel valued. They want to contribute, but they don't want to do it in an environment that is toxic, where there's a complete lack of leadership or direction, or the leadership that they have is not conducive to doing anything right. And people go, "Oh, this doesn't resonate with me." So people would say, I'd rather, not diminishing any role, but I'd rather leave a six-figure role and then go work
Mhm.
doing a minimum wage role because I'm going to get more fulfillment out of that than I would in this six-figure plus role. And when you see that, that robs
Yes.
society of so many great, talented people when we have these environments that are lacking, really good leadership. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and and that's kind of what I've observed over the years. And it's like the world has changed so much. People have changed. There's a lot that, we're dealing with in this like complex, complicated world. And it's almost as if leaders are so used to the quarterly targets, right? They want to hit those numbers. There's all that pressure that's there. And what ends up happening in those sort of kind of stressful scenarios is, the mind is prone to just repeat what it's done in the past. That's what it'll keep doing. People will, in times of like high stress, bounce to those old behaviors that might not be very good. And now the challenge is, as what you state, is like workplace environments end up being like toxic, lacking engagement, and the creativity just plummets. So there's all this desire for innovation. So leaders almost assume, okay, let's throw out more tools, more innovation processes, more frameworks. People aren't following along, but that's not the problem. The problem is that leaders are not paying attention to their people and what's happening around them, and using that insight to be like, okay, how do we create an environment together where we're creating? And you said that word, and human beings have this innate need to create. And when we are in the process of creation, we're using all of the elements of our consciousness. And that's how we can do like profound discoveries, or this is where people will naturally in the job find efficiencies, innovations, because there's always those kind of creative juices that are always flowing. And so I always just find it so surprising of leaders come in heavy-handed. You know, they want the mechanics there, the tools there. They want these robust processes. And I've built all that. I've done all that. But there's such a danger and a trap because there's almost like a sense of, stability they think that's making. And it's just their people. They just got to work on those engagement scores. It's the people, but no, 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 it's you. It's how you're leading.
Yeah, we see it. People don't leave companies, they leave their managers, they leave their leaders because it's just, toxic environment. And, I
Mm.
led some primary care clinics, and I remember taking over one in
Mm.
particular that had uh, an average over it was around for, at that point, about 5 years. It was averaging 86% turnover. So almost 9 out of
Wow.
10 people were leaving. And these are master's level and above educated clinicians. And they were leaving as if it was a fast food restaurant. And they're a teenager. They don't stay long. I get it. But they weren't, because it was such a toxic cesspool.
Mm.
Communication was non-existent. The management was non-existent or didn't care, weren't listening, things like that. So I went in, and I knew it was a problem because I knew the person that was leading it before, and they shared with me the challenges. They were interim; they were only there to kind of basically keep the ship afloat until they were able to find a role that they were looking for. So I went in knowing full well the mess. I'm like, I wasn't going to run away from it. And, I
Mm.
left a fairly quote unquote comfortable place where I was as safe as you can be. And I'm like, I want this challenge. And a lot of people thought I was absolutely crazy. But and I am, but that's another story for another day. But I was able to reduce that turnover after a year to 6% annually.
Wow.
And I
Wow.
and I didn't. There was a couple of people that I, using a Jack Welch term, dehired because they just weren't the right fit there. They went on to bigger and better things and gave them a reference and even a reference call. It told them, that they're great at this and this and this and this. So they were able to parlay that into better roles for those individuals. I didn't wish them ill will. They just weren't the right fit for what we were accomplishing. And then we turned things around. We grew the clinic. We were able to recruit physicians, and the Ministry of Health gave us permission to recruit when there was a freeze on adding physicians. We were allowed to do that. I'm sure the Ministry of Health doesn't want that public, but we did. And statute of limitations, I've been gone for a while, so I can say that. It's election time too. They want to grow healthcare. But anyway, end of the day, you can do it. And how I did it is real simple. I listened to the people. I created an
Hmm.
environment for them to thrive and create. So, what would you do if you were in these shoes? What would you do
Yeah.
differently? And humble yourself and say, okay, if I wasn't here and you were running this clinic, how would you run it? And not and just to you know understand how they saw things, because they saw things that I couldn't see, and I see things that they probably wouldn't know about. And together, we group that information together to make a healthier organization, which, it paid dividends. And I was there for several years, and, look back fondly on it and was able to accomplish a lot. But it was the people that did it. It wasn't me. I just created an environment for them to thrive. It was up to them to step up and thrive, and they did. And that's, as a leader, that's what you want. You want people to thrive.
Yeah, that's precisely it. I think you also mentioned it earlier that there's a lot of potential that's out there with people that's just getting wasted. We're not leveraging, we're not utilizing that potential. And part of it comes down to like our assumptions, like around, the turnover in your scenario of what was causing it. But it sounds like to me that you were able to bring other perspectives in because you saw things in a different way. And that is what's key about when we lead consciously, that we know that one person does not hold the entire view of reality. Like, what is reality? Each of us are experiencing our own. So there's just no way that one person can see it all. But it's like rather that is like what you did in your case of gathering different points of view, gathering different sources of data to kind of understand like what is really here? What do we believe? is happening. And and getting underneath all of that to kind of like unearth sometimes these assumptions that come to be, and leaders will believe like, oh, employees are quitting because they're really unhappy with the lack of flexibility or whatever it is. But it's a thing of like, hey, I'm not heard. So it's like, what am I doing here if I'm not heard? And if leaders do that very simple thing of stop talking and just start listening, they're going to understand more of what's happening in the moment because they're observing the conscious experience as it's happening. And so therefore they're going to have more insight into, how to navigate those challenges going forward with teams and people.
Absolutely. So let's segue to the book. You got a book coming out, and it's on this very topic. And
Yes.
obviously, the research that you've done over the years has
Yeah.
come forth, and you've put it together in a beautiful book. So, why don't you let's talk about the book a little bit. So, what I guess I always ask authors this. Why would you give up so much of your time to write a book? Because it is a time-consuming adventure, as you know. But
Mhm.
what was the motivation behind it to, really get this book out there?
Yeah, yeah. So it's like the idea for the book came to me like in 2016. It was a long time ago. And it was actually during the pandemic. I had an opportunity to leave the financial institution I was working at. And so I was just pondering my life about what should I be doing right now? Like how do I serve humanity and make the world better? And I just saw my note sitting on my desk, like I need to make my book. I need to share with the world of how can we use our consciousness to create transformation of organizations, of society, or whatever form of leadership, so we can move to a better world. I think at that point there's a lot of kind of cracks that were opening in many ways, and from that time, it's just kind of continued. And so, I started on this whole journey of like creating this book. And the funny thing is that I could always feel this book. Like I could feel the words. And just like an artist goes in to create like a painting, it's like I knew what had to be there. It's almost as if the human language had to come to me and I had to like craft this book. But in my journey, I rewrote it several times because I wanted to make the concepts so accessible for people. And during my journey, there was a stint where I ended up back in the corporate world and consulting here in Toronto. So I found myself back there, but then I just heard my true inner voice, and it asked me a question. It said, "What are you doing?" And by this point, I already had moved from Vancouver to Toronto, and uprooted, shifted my life. And the voice said, "Like, what are you doing?" And I quit. I had to quit. I had to leave that wonderful opportunity. And people are just like, "Whoa, are you crazy? Like you're leaving and you're just going to work on this book?" Yep. And that's what I did because I know that I need to get this in the hands of leaders because it's very important that they start to pay attention to themselves, start to pay attention to their consciousness and lead with that awareness because we desperately need it.
Yeah, it's painfully obvious because of the organizations that struggle. And a stat that I use all the time on the show that just blew me away when I first saw it was, 20, or excuse me, and the Fortune 500 companies in the U.S. In the year 2000, so 25 years ago, 52% of those companies are gone or have been
Yes.
acquired by somebody else. So these are the top 500 companies from a financial, publicly traded, of course, standpoint on the planet are gone. And you're like, okay, how in the world did that happen? That many companies that were the biggest in the world, all of a sudden they're gone a quarter century later. What happened? There's obviously lots of things that played out, but leadership is a common denominator. And there were leadership mistakes. And why were there mistakes? Because people weren't listening, they weren't communicating, they were, we're gonna ignore that. Blockbuster doesn't have to worry about Netflix. Okay, taxi companies don't have to worry about Uber or Lyft.
Mhm.
Everybody thinks, oh, I don't have to worry about them. Yeah, yes, you do. If you don't, you know, listen and be agile and pivot and make the necessary adjustments to grow, and bravery is a big part of it. And I commend you for your bravery to say, you know what, I'm listening to the voice inside me telling me that I need to do this because the world needs this, and I'm being called to put this book out there and share it with people and leaders because we desperately need better leaders across the board because our companies, everybody, if society will either thrive or starve based on what companies are doing. And we're seeing it. We see it time and time again. Every year, it's the time of this recording, we're just a couple months away from the past holiday season, and you walk in the shopping malls and you see a handful of stores that were once there are no longer there. It's an annual thing
Hmm.
with retail. That's one area, but it's definitely a bellwether notification of, okay, what's going on with the economy when you start seeing more and more stores closing up or companies up and leaving Canada, for example. There's all kinds of dynamics with that as well. But having it said, is if those organizations were being led right, they wouldn't have to make that choice because they would have been able to see the conditions that come up. It rare, short of a pandemic, it is rare for, and you know this because of your financial background, the writing's on the wall, but you get a warning of it. Usually there's a pretty good lead time where you're going to recognize, okay, we're down 2 quarters in a row. Okay, things are how are we, projecting in Q4. So there's some runway there for people to make some decisions and adjust accordingly, but they need to listen to their people. They need to understand what's going on in the marketplace and all that. And again, short of a pandemic like event, there's usually some hints or clues along the way to give you ample time to make the adjustments. And we see time and time again, doesn't not just retail, but every industry where people ignore those signs. They don't listen to their people. They don't listen to their customers. They're like, this is how we do things. Okay, well, you're going to do that until you're one of those 52% that are no longer here. And all of a sudden, you
Hmm.
see how disruptive that is to the families that work there, the communities that they're in. It has a gigantic ripple effect that it reaches well beyond the 500 people that were laid off. I mean, that has a horrible effect, and a lot of that could have been prevented if the leadership were actually conscious of what was going on.
Exactly, exactly. And it's almost as if they develop a fixed view, right, of what they think is happening. And they get so attached to those ideas. And it's what they truly believe. It's what they believe, or it's part of their like they can sense it, they can see something over here, but they're like, I'm not going to pay attention to that. I'm just going to, keep doing this over here. And that is where they kind of fall into the pitfalls of their own mind because they start believing a reality that is not real. Like, as you said, they're not paying attention to what's happening in the outer world, what is happening in the external environment. Rather, they believe they're safe in the walls of their organization and whatever view that they think is happening, and they can control it all. Well, no, you can't. You cannot control it all. And they forget that the more that we ground ourselves in the external environment, because that's who you serve, that's where your customers are, that's where your suppliers are. The more you understand what's happening there with them, that is your insight that you bring inside the organization and to your employees and your teams. And you keep this openness, like be open to the daily experiences that are going on. And yeah, and I think it's a really old business mindset of getting so fixed in certainty. We've got our business model. Let's just rinse and repeat over and over and over again. They're not being adaptable. If you think about an organization, they got to consider it like a life. It's alive, right? It's a working organism. And so they got to treat it that way, that it's never going to be the same. And I wrote a sentence in my book that not even a rock stays the same in this world. Nothing is permanent. So that's why we have to nurture what we want to keep.
Yeah, it's so important. I love the rock analogy because, yeah, it just things take, and the wind, elements, all that stuff changes the dynamics of it. And even us as humans, I am different than I was 25 years ago. I know I am. I had hair back then. I know. I saw pictures. I'm like, oh, people are like, you had hair. Yes, I had hair. It's like, I know that's hard to believe, but yes, I did. But, things evolve, and my
Mhm.
viewpoints on things and experiences, because I've been refined, I've been open to let things happen,
Mhm.
I've paid attention, I've had an element of curiosity on things, and like, okay, I wonder if this does this, would this do this, or I wonder why that's happening right now, and you dig into it and you go, okay, these seem to be the elements of what's going on right now. From, don't just accept things at a surface level, ask those deeper questions. Sort of the cognitive behavioral therapy where it comes in. So you start digging deeper into things. And I do that naturally anyway, and just trying to figure out, okay, why is this happening? What's happening that we're not seeing? Or a question that I ask a lot, and this is a question I think every leader should ask: what am I not seeing here? And it's an element of being vulnerable, but it's also, there's something that I'm missing here. Help me with that. What is it? And even if you're asking the question yourself, like, what am I missing here? Get yourself in a space where, like, what am I missing? And then you can reach out to a mentor or guide, any type of guidance, or colleagues, or people that report to you. It's like, what am I missing here? But do it in a way where you are truly open to receive. What am I missing? Because then those insights can help you go, oh, okay. All right, that makes sense, because that's connecting, these three things together. And now I see why this is happening the way it is. Okay, what do you think we should do about it? And then you open it up and let people come up with some ideas, because I know this is hard for the leadership ego. Many times your people know a lot more about the situation than you do, and they're going to make a better choice than you are. So trust that, because everybody hopefully has the same end goal in mind, is making sure that the organization is successful in addressing their clients' and customers' needs. You do that, you're going to be okay.
Yeah, that's precisely it. And you said the word ego, and I think that's what, gets leaders. It traps them. And people just have to let go of the notion of like having all the answers. And there is such a beauty, and I think there's great fun in this like path of discovery, as you said, this sort of curiosity of like what's going on here. And when a leader is demonstrating that behavior, in front of their colleagues and their teams, others are going to do the same. You're going to get the same sort of behavior mirroring in your teams, right? As well. And that is when kind of the ideas of like true innovation come out. And the other profound thing that happens is just a significant amount of learning, because there's such great insights that come up. And so people are learning together, right? And that is how you also kind of increase, your team performance and cohesion, because that learning is taking place. But it all begins if that leader is willing, to ask the questions and to be okay with like, I've got really smart people on my team. They are the expert in that. And like I did some work in the past where I implemented this whole framework for making process efficiencies. And it wasn't about the leaders, it wasn't about the directors or the managers being the decision makers. It was those that are doing the work, those that are serving the customers, those that are working with the suppliers, those that are in it every day know it completely. So it's like, how can a leader go and say that they know more than that person? Well, no. We'll flip it around. People that are closest to the work with the knowledge and the insights bring that in. And that is where, you start to kind of unleash great potential in organizations when you have that sort of powerful behavior demonstrated by leaders.
And when you have that, you have a really healthy and thriving organization that innovates, and we need more of those here for sure. So, Seema, I've loved this conversation. Where can people find out more about you, the book, and everything else you're doing?
Yes, so details about my book can be found at my website at seemadanoa.com. Also, people can find me on LinkedIn, just with the same handle as Seema Dhanoa, and on Instagram as well. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to releasing this book on March 28th. And one of the things that I want to do is create a dialogue. I want to create a dialogue together, so we're all talking about this, and we're all kind of learning and kind of evolving together. I think that's really what I feel like we need to do as leaders, is open our hands and extend them out to other leaders.
Absolutely. We're not alone in all this, and collectively we can make some gigantic impact for businesses in our world. So definitely I'll have all that information in the show notes. So Seema, congratulations again on the book and thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Michael.